it's intuitive that we can learn from failure, and it seems like a very strong mechanism, then why do we wait for failure to happen? If we know it's powerful, then why do we wait for it to happen? Why don't we deliberately design for failure?
Welcome to the ReeThink Podcast. Today I have another guest. I'm very excited about that. It's Manu Kapur. Manu Kapur is a learning researcher, and he has created his own learning theory within 20 years of research. He's also the ETH director of the Singapore research facility, but I think it's the best way when you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rudi. Thanks for having me. So my name is Manu Kapur. I'm a professor for learning sciences and higher education at ETH Zurich. And since January last year, I'm the director of the Singapore ETH Center in Singapore.
Great stuff. So you have created your own learning theory and published this in this book, which I read, and I was so excited to read about the science of learning. And I have to tell you, you touched on a couple of things where I was looking back at my, let's say, journey to learning stuff, or my journey in school, and I thought you're up to something, because I felt always something is wrong, fundamentally wrong, how we learn. So maybe what was intriguing is that you had 5 careers. Maybe can you just tell us how it came to be that you end up being a learning researcher?
Yeah, so look, as a child or as a teenager, I wanted to play football, and I played competitive football for many, many years. That was my life. Wanted to play professionally and so on. But late in my teens, around when I was 19 or 20, I had a very bad tackle in a game. And after that, there was downhill until I had 4 surgeries. And so the football career was over. Right, so which was hard, because that's what I dreamed of. Then I finished up my engineering degree, so did bachelor's in mechanical engineering for 4 years. But by the end of that, I knew I was not wanting to become an engineer. Did a couple of startups back in the day, because that was the internet dot-com boom era. That too didn't work out. And then I was literally broke when I got an opportunity to teach math to teenagers in schools, and that I really started to enjoy. But then, as I explained in the book, I encountered a phenomena where I thought I was teaching very, very well, but the students were not learning deeply. And I think that led me to get interested in human cognition itself and how people learn. That kind of led me to a master's and a doctoral degree. So I went to Columbia to do my doctoral degree. And after that, and that's where I invented productive failure. And 20 years on, I'm still doing research on this program on this theory and the method.
Can you tell me, because in your work you described there's 3 big problems in learning. Could you explain where it persists in the modern learning system that we have currently implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about 3. There are many, many issues, but I simplify them and say, well, if there's a problem of remembering. So retention is a problem, and we can all relate to it. You study so hard for your exams, and then 2 days after or a week after, it's as though it's all gone, right? So retaining information, the memory of the things that you is a big problem. And then understanding it. So while you can remember, can you really understand the material, the concepts better? So deep understanding is also a problem. And then the biggest problem is the transfer problem. And that is, you don't want to just remember stuff. You don't want to just understand and remember stuff. You want to really be able to apply it in a new context, in a novel situation. And that is, again, very well established, that transfer, we call it transfer, the ability to apply to novel situations. And transfer is very hard in human learning. So those are the 3 problems: of retention, of understanding, and of transfer.
The thing with transfer, so maybe I push a bit forward here because transfer for me was like the biggest excitement in that sense. Because one thing that I understood transfer is the thing that everybody says like geniuses are very good in transfer. And
Mm.
I was always asking myself, why is that? That, for instance, there are certain games, for instance, when you play them hard enough, you get better in this game, but it's hardly that you transfer the ability that you played at that game. But in certain games, that is not the case. So can you explain a bit what is the topic about transfer and why it applies sometimes and sometimes it doesn't apply at all?
Yeah, so transfer, I think fundamentally, we used to think transfer is something that a person is a personal capability, right? Either you have the capability or you don't. And I think more and more we're finding that transfer is dependent on how you learn the thing in the first place. So there are certain ways of learning that makes for better transfer than so you learn using, as I say, direct instruction, transfer tends to be low. But if you learn using failure, transfer tends to be high. And really, ultimately, it comes down to how flexibly your knowledge is assembled for you. So if you're assembling new knowledge or encoding new information in a flexible manner, then then you would likely to transfer. The example analogy I gave is like playing Lego blocks. For example, Lego blocks are like your concepts and ideas, right? Now, if as a child I can give you Lego blocks and I show you a recipe to make a plane. So these are the Lego blocks, and you can make a plane. I show you the assembly of the plane. So these Lego blocks, turn them into a plane. If you do step by step, and you build a plane. And that's like direct instruction. You see the Lego block as assembled in the form of a plane. So you understand a plane, but can you go from a plane to building a rocket, right? And what happens is if you only seen the Lego blocks assembled as a plane, then they get tied to that assembly. It gets very hard for you to unblock everything and then reimagine it as a plane. So if I were to give you another way, I say, here's Lego blocks, build anything that you want, right? A car or an engine or a plane or a rocket, build anything you want. And then you try to build it, you imagine, the same piece in multiple different ways. And then I say, by the way, this set of Lego blocks are really meant to build a plane. They're perfect to build a plane. And then I show you how to build a plane using the same Lego blocks. There, you've imagined the Lego blocks, knowledge, the concept, in different ways of assembling, right? Your own and in the plane, and in the correct way, so to speak. And so when you learn it that way, then when I ask you, okay, now that we've learned how to build a plane, build something else, you're more likely to be able to build that something else because your assembly was in a more flexible manner. And that's what we need to. We need to teach in ways, or we need to learn in ways that help us play with the Lego blocks a little bit more.
I mean, it's great, the analogy that you have made, because during reading your book, I was in this moment where I thought the way you explain your framework, productive failure, this is far more engaging, and it's just reading about it excites me because it's about problem solving. And maybe you mentioned now productive failure already 2 times. Maybe can you explain it a bit? What is productive failure? What is the main concept of it? And how is the structure of it?
Yeah.
So we have a better understanding. We can go deeper with this topic.
Yeah. So productive failure is the idea that if learning from failure is compelling, it's intuitive that we can learn from failure, and it seems like a very strong mechanism, then why do we wait for failure to happen? Now, if we know it's powerful, then why do we wait for it to happen? Why don't we deliberately design for failure when you want to learn something new? So productive failure looks at how can we design for failure when you're about to learn something new? And so if you look at how people learn when they're about to learn something new, the most intuitive response or most intuitive strategy is, oh, if you don't know something and I want to teach you something, let me just tell you, let me just explain it to you very clearly what that thing is. And that seems to be intuitively the best way to learn. Turns out that is not very optimal. So in productive failure, instead of going straight into the telling, into the explanation and so on and so forth, we start with designing failure in problem solving. So we design these problem solving activities that are challenging yet intuitive, that you can generate multiple ideas, solutions, representations, but they're designed in a way that you won't get to the correct solution. And that is not even the goal. The goal is really to generate different ideas and representations and solutions, and not to worry about getting to the goal. And what this does is, as you solve these problems, you try to solve it in many different ways, and that activates your knowledge. Cognitively, it activates you. And if after this exploration or generation, a teacher can come and assemble the knowledge for you and then teach you the concept. So there's two phases. First, it's a problem-solving generation phase, followed by an instruction, an expert assembly phase. When you combine these two in that sequence, that's what makes failure productive. That's how you learn deeper, and then how you learn flexibly so that you can transfer as well. So it's a two phases.
Okay, so just to summarize what you explained, so taking your Lego blocks analogy means I start with a problem set, then I use the Lego blocks I have already and try to build, let's say, the rocket. And I do maybe 3 attempts. It turned out not to be a really functional rocket. Certain things fail. Then later, you as a teacher will give me additional Lego blocks and show me, look, this is how you build the full rocket ship. And while the attempts that you have created before, you have already a deeper understanding and know what is important. And then the knowledge or what the teacher tells you can stick better with you. Is that?
That's right. That's a good way to think about it. Yes. The Lego analogy really works. Give the child space to play intuitively, build things themselves first based on their knowledge, prior knowledge, and then use that to then show them the canonical assembly, the correct assembly, so to speak.
But is it not the total opposite of what is like teach at this point of time? It's like almost like failing is condemned. So the mindset is different. And I can even imagine that some teachers will tell, like, this is not efficient. I could tell them immediately how it is right. And then maybe have this mindset of, if they don't get it, it's the failure of the learner, not the teacher.
Yeah, I know you're absolutely right. So I think we have to have a more nuanced conversation about failure. Productive failure does not say all failure is good. So when a surgeon is performing a surgery, you don't want any failure. Okay. Or when you're taking an exam, a high stakes exam, you want to reduce failure, obviously. Yes, if failure happens in those situations, yes, we can learn from it. But that's not the productive failure that I'm talking about. What the productive failure is that you design failure when you're early in your learning journey, when you're about to learn something new. So and the logic is that if you do that, you will learn more deeply, so that when the possibility of failure during high stakes is low. So you're fighting high stakes failure, which you want to reduce, with low stakes failure by learning early on. So it's like fighting with failure. And of course, so that's what productive failure, the failure in productive failure is. It's the low stakes, carefully curated in a safe space, designed for you with the expectation that you will struggle in a constrained way, and then you will learn, but then you learn deeply so that later on failure is.
So once again, then we know now, like, problem solving creates a higher activation. Right. So then in comparison to simply listening to a lecture, and what is causing or what is happening in the brain that this activates more than rather just listening?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. Not all problem solving that is designed well to activate relevant knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. So if I want you to learn rocket, I want to design problems that activate knowledge that is relevant for learning about rockets.
Yeah.
And it should not be relevant for learning about gardening, for example. So it has to be relevant. And problem solving, when it's designed like that in a good way, and we have certain principles for doing that, that's when it activates the knowledge, the prior knowledge of the learner. And the mind works in a way that the more relevant knowledge you can activate, the easier you make it possible for the mind to process new information. right? So when you go direct into telling or listening, you are activating knowledge as well, because that's the only way of making sense of new information.
Yeah.
But you're doing this in parallel, right? You're processing information by activating whatever it is you know. And if you're able to activate a lot of knowledge, you will make a lot more. Your processing of the new information will be a lot easier. But in productive failure, what we do is we kind of somewhat decouple it. I'm simplifying it, but somewhat decouple this process. We say, let's activate relevant prior knowledge through this failure-based protocol. And then when you listen to the lecture or hear the expert assembly, that assembly, because this knowledge has been activated, you'd be able to process this information better. That's one. And B, you'd be able to integrate it. So this activated knowledge becomes like hooks, like a net.
Yeah. Yeah.
The wider the activation, the wider the net. New knowledge has a better chance of getting coupled or integrated into this net. So for those two reasons, activation of knowledge and how the brain activation works is actually quite critical.
Okay. And talking about retention, this is also something that I read, and it goes into the same like mode of like failing. Like what I read is that failing to retain something or get to remember something and it fails is also helpful to retain better memory.
Yeah. So trying to remember is a learning event. Basically, that's the idea. So when you, for example, if you go to a party, you know, and I don't know you, suppose, and I just walk up and you have no name badge or anything, I just walk up to you randomly and I say, hey, are you Mark? And you say, no, I'm not Mark, I'm Rudi. Okay.
Yeah.
So as opposed to I go up and ask you, what's your name? And you say, I'm Rudi. So in the first instance, I guessed your name. Chances are I will guess it wrong because it's a random name. And then I learned the correct name, versus in the second case where you just tell me your correct name, right? In which case you're more likely to remember that information,
Yeah.
you know, 3 months later, 6 months later. And it turns out that, you know, guessing it wrong and then being corrected actually helps you remember the name a lot better than if you were just told the name. And if 3 months later I were not to remember the name for some reason, if I fail to remember the name then I get corrected, it again is better than just being told the name. So every time you fail to remember something, provided you get the correct information or feedback, actually we call it the retrieval failure. The retrieval failure actually improves the memory strength if you get the correct knowledge. And the more retrieval failure you have, the better it is for your memory storage in the long term. That's the counterintuitive part, because if you're learning something, we think that we should, you know, cram it all up in the short space, right? And then learn it all together. And that's how we remember by this. Whereas what this suggests is you learn the material first, and then you allow some of it to decay. So allow some forgetting.
Yeah.
And this seems counterintuitive, but you allow some forgetting, and then you retrieve it. You try to remember it. Chances are, because you've allowed for some forgetting, you will fail to remember all of it. And then once you fail to remember all of it, then once that failure has happened, retrieval failure has happened, then you find out what is it that you forgot. And then this idea is, then you will remember the material even better. So you have to allow forgetting to remember better.
It's really crazy because it's almost like everything upside down in a sense, what you're used to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that struck me also the most, but thinking about it, it makes sense, and I can observe myself having the same, is like that we remember things in certain contexts better. Meaning, when for instance, I have my account number for my bank account, it's easy for me to retrieve the information when I'm at the bank account, like the ATM machine. But when I had to think about it and tell you right now, I'm struggling. And what is the reason for that? That we tend to learn more in a contextual sense, and we retrieve it better in the same context. I have an idea about that, but I like to know what do you think? What is the reason for that?
Yeah, and that's simply the idea that, you know, knowledge is not like a file in your computer Once you have it, you can access it anytime. Knowledge gets situated in whatever you're doing. So if you're at home listening to music while learning something or reading something, right? The reading, what you remember of the reading gets tied to the context and what was happening, around you and how you were feeling. That's why if a particular smell has a power to invoke a memory, whereas otherwise you may not remember, right? So the idea we encode information all around us, although we think that we are only attending to one thing, which is the thing that we're trying to learn, but actually we're encoding everything along with that thing. And that thing gets coupled with everything around it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why if you have to retrieve something, if all of these attendant things are also part of the context, then you're more likely to retrieve that thing better, right? Than if those things are not part of it. And that's also one reason why transfer to novel situations is hard. Because in novel situations, these attendant things are missing somewhat. And therefore you have a harder difficulty reaching the knowledge that you want to retrieve. So this is the home advantage effect, as I call it, like in sports. Teams generally perform better at homes than away, right? And that's one of the reasons is that, when they're training at home so much all the time, the home games, they have everything that's primed for performance because it's encoded like that.
Yeah.
The moment you take the same team, same player, same skill to another place, there's no reason why they should not play better, right? They should not play equally well. It's the home advantage. The context matters.
Okay. The thing with the home team is quite remarkable in that sense.
Yeah.
The thing what I was thinking is coming back to like the whole context thing. Is it maybe because I was like really trying to understand what is the reason? Is it maybe that our brain, because it learns by association, it preserves energy that everything is not like retrievable in every context? Is that maybe a function of preserving energy and still having the ability to retain almost unlimited information? So this is what the only thing that I was thinking about, but maybe we have an answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, not in the same energy, not in the context of, not in using concepts of energy, but there is a bottleneck in the brain, and that's called the working memory. So the brain can hold a practically infinite amount of information in the long-term memory. So from that standpoint, the brain is unbelievable. But it can only process a limited amount at each time. Because otherwise, it's not possible to sustain that kind of course, you can talk about it energy-wise, or, it will take up too much oxygen, too much energy to be able to process everything at the same time. And that's how the human brain has evolved. So that, you can retain a lot of information, you can learn a lot of information, but it has to go through this bottleneck called working memory.
Okay.
And this bottleneck goes both ways. For incoming information, new information being processed, and for retrieving information from the long term. It all is a bottleneck. And this is precisely maybe related to what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned encoding strategies already. Can you explain why they are crucial for long-term retention and what you mean with encoding strategies?
So encoding is simply the idea that you processing information and you connect it to what you know, transfer it to your long-term memory, basically. Like I said, the only way to transfer to long-term memory is by processing it in the working memory. And the processing of the working memory is better if there is information from the long-term memory that can be activated to the new information that's coming in. And that's where encoding happens. So if you have relevant knowledge being activated to process the new information, then the memory bottleneck is not as bad as if you have literally no long-term, no relevant prior knowledge, and you just have to process the information coming in. So if I start speaking, I don't know, Greek or Russian, and you don't know anything about this language, right? It can be incredibly hard for you to learn these languages. If if you speak English and I start speaking, say, German or French, it's easier because there's some overlap in the languages, in the alphabet, and even in the words, there. So I think it makes it just easier to process. information and learn new things if you can activate it.
So, but this means like when I, for instance, like to start learning Greek, then if I have a certain strategy to put it in a context that I know already, that it might be easier for me to get the learning process going.
Yeah. And that's why immersion for language learning works very well.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty about immersion is that you're learning new things, new words, new sentences, new ways of thinking, but you're learning it in the context in which it is to be used.
Yeah.
So you're not just learning the vocabulary and the sentence structure, you're learning it in the context. And therefore, when you want to use it later, if you're in that context, you're more likely to be able to. So you learn how to order in a cafe once. Yes, in that cafe you learn, okay, and then you come out, and the next time you're at a cafe, you're better able to perform that or to speak in that way. So yes, immersion is exactly the using context to drive learning and retrieval.
That's great. And you mentioned something, and this is also something I could really, let's say, how I can say it, like this was deeply resonating with me, that you mentioned that wonder and awe increase retention. And for me, this is like my biggest driver, that I'm looking for things that I'm curious about and learning new things where I think like, wow, this is amazing. So what is this that this has such an effect of learning? And it's, I think, related to emotions, right?
Yeah, so I mean, awe or wonderment and awe, if you can create that, right? Some people naturally have that, but if you can create a sense of wonderment and awe, it drives curiosity, it drives inquiry, because it is emotionally, there's an emotive charge to it. And the way human emotions work is when there's an emotive charge, we pay more attention to things. And if you pay more attention to things, we also then process it better. That's why, and unfortunately, negative emotions actually charge you more. And that's the trick in the failure part as well, right? So
Yeah.
when we deliberately designed for you to try different things, but none of them work,
Yeah.
we are actually deliberately designing for failure. But alongside, when that happens, we're deliberately designing for some level of frustration, some level of negative emotion, because we know the negative emotions will then drive attention and processing of the new information. So it's like hacking your emotion charge through failure activation in a safe way, so that drives your attention.
Yeah, so you don't get discouraged, but I think it's a great way also to give children like the perspective that your negative emotion can help you achieve whatever you want.
Exactly. I mean, it goes back to athletics and football, if or any other sport. Sometimes you don't want to, irritate or make the best player on the other team angry, because it's like if you make them angry, there's something else that comes out, and that may completely take the game away from you. And that's happened so many times. Of course, the reverse is also possible, that they attend to the wrong thing and then they go down a spiral.
Yeah.
But if you know how to hack the emotions in the productive way, then you can really increase your attention and performance.
Yeah, I remember a story that you have told about a friend that went to university, and he was like a great student, but at the start he was like more focusing on like having a great time with other people and partying. And then he failed, I think, and then the shame was so big, in particular in math, that he was so determined to get it right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think sometimes failure and affect are naturally tied to each other. And we often think that that's a bad thing. I guess what we are saying in productive failure, and what we've shown is, in a small dosage, in a safe way, it's actually a good thing.
You have mentioned at the beginning that transfer occurs when the way you have learned something is accumulated in a way that is, let's say, more flexible. And I was thinking about coming back to, because the whole topic of transfer was like, for me, really like and you mentioned it's the holy grail of learning, and I was very intrigued by it. And one thing that I thought to myself is are there people who are very good at transfer, just basically have the intuitive understanding to apply something that they have already learned in a different context? Or is it simply just, as you said it, it's just the way they accumulate the skill?
Obviously, there are individual differences in our capacities and capabilities, right? So some people are naturally more, smarter than others. Some people are naturally more curious than others. Some people are naturally more athletic than others, So there are natural, that's just evolution, There is variation and there are individual differences. And cognitive capacities are similar. There are individual differences. But that is not the sole determining function, is the point. The point is how you learn new information also contributes to your ability to transfer. So yes, people who already have a very high capability, they can obviously transfer well. But people who don't, if you change the way their learning method, they learn new information, they may start to, show transfer capabilities that are also very high.
Okay.
Excuse me.
No problem, no problem. I mean, we discussed productive failure, and its effectiveness is 3 times as in comparison to normal. And can you walk us through how, first of all, why is that possible, and how you have conducted the data to arrive to this outcome? I mean, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. So, basically the way to test a theory is to do experiments, and we compare productive failure. So you want to learn some new math concept, you can learn it in 2 different ways. Either you go through a productive failure method or you go through a direct instruction method. And, and we randomize people into both these conditions, with the same teachers, same times, same teaching materials. And after they've learned through these methods, then we give them an assessment of what they know, how deeply they understand it, and how they can apply, whether they can apply it to novel context. And by looking at differences in the performance, we can start to figure out, which group is better than the other. And that's how we determine the productive failure effect over direct instruction. And that's why we found, basically, that the effect size of productive failure is robust, because compared to what you can learn, say, in a school year with a good teacher, the effect sizes are almost twice, on average twice. But if you design it well, they can go up to 3 times.
Awesome. And now you have used this framework to apply it to a startup, LearnPF, right?
Yeah.
And so tell me, what is LearnPF about, and how you are using that in with combination with AI?
Yeah. So you see, if you look at a lot of edtech startups and you look at the underlying learning model, including with AI, you find that these are generic tutors. If you ask them the question, they give you the answer. Some of them are better at taking you through some Socratic dialogue. But, the underlying learning model is still direct instruction. You don't know something, I will explain it to you. And that is precisely the learning model that my research has shown is not as optimal. So the idea of LearnPF was, can we take productive failure as the learning model, and can we train AI to design using that model, and to tutor using that model, so that the next time you're learning using if you learn through LearnPF, our system, it takes you through the productive failure process, and it teaches you using productive failure so that you learn deeper. And with AI, we are able to do that at scale, because then I can also not just train the AI on the productive failure model, I can also personalize the learning based on how you perform in the productive failure in your own productive failure journey. So it's both, the value proposition is both in terms of the robust pedagogical model, also AI engineering trained on that model, and then deep personalization based on the interaction between the learner and the AI to personalize it. And I think that's something that is totally missing in the whole space of learning systems out there.
Can you walk us through how I can imagine this is implemented in a classroom? So because I mentioned there's like a teacher, of course, and in order to implement productive failure, he needs to be also trained to a different teaching style. And then you have the students, they are working using the AI model. In a sense, do they have like a laptop, a iPad, or how does it work? So I can imagine how it's implemented.
So you can access it. You can access it on a web browser or on your phone or a tablet. So it's basically, you can go into the system by logging in. And so the teacher can basically say, hey, Rudi, tomorrow you're going to learn this. I'm going to teach you this new concept. I want you to log in. I've released this module on learning, I don't know, statistics or calculus or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You go through the activities that are designed for you in the app. Let's call it the app, right? And in the app, when you log into the app, it says, oh, Rudi, welcome. You want to learn differentiation today. So let me take you through a productive failure journey, remind you what it is about. Then you do lots of problem solving. Same challenging but intuitive problem solving. It takes you through the failure-based activation problems. You're solving problems but not getting them right all the time. And then it's learning how you're solving the problem. The AI system is learning how you're solving the problem. And then once your sufficient activation is done, the AI tutor may say, okay, now your system is properly activated. Now you're ready to learn the correct thing. And then it assembles new knowledge, just like a teacher. It assembles the new knowledge based on what you did in the first phase, right? And takes you through a discussion around that. So it assembles. So if you've already done this, say, as preparatory work coming into the class, then the teacher can then organize the class as a whole and say, okay, all of you have done this part. Now let's come together, class, to have a discussion about, Rudi, how did you find it? How did you find it? And then, let's compare and contrast. And if there are any, and everything that we've designed is tied based on our research to the misconception space that people have. So for every concept, every intuition that we build, or the protocol is tied to a misconception. So we know very precisely, Rudi, by the time you come to the class. And the teacher will also know precisely, of all the 10 possible misconceptions, say, for this concept, Rudi is almost okay in 5 of them, perfect in 3 of them, and 2 are still really problematic. And the teacher will then have that same information for the entire class as a whole. So that gives teacher a lot of information about how to use the classroom time, for example, very effectively.
Okay. And just for my understanding, so let's say like the problem solving challenge, is that something that the platform does already, or does the teacher need to assemble these, or?
No, the content is, that's why generative AI was a game changer. Because designing for productive failure is quite hard. It's a very high level of expertise. Teachers can build this expertise, but it takes a long time. So it's not a strategy for scaling.
Yeah.
So productive failure up until 3 years ago was a great model, lots of effective. The big question, can you design it?
Yeah.
So it was not scalable. AI changed because we can now train the AI on the productive failure model to actually do the design. So if you're a teacher, and tomorrow I'm teaching my kids the concepts of proportion.
Yeah.
I want to teach using productive failure. What do I do?
Yeah.
Oh, I must learn the principles. I must design.
Yeah.
Or you can just, I'll use the app, LearnPF.
Yeah.
Go to the module on proportion, and there you go. You can see how it's designed, but you can get your students to do it.
I think, like, when I imagine that, I see that as something that is far more engaging for even the teacher and also for the students. And I can give you an example. So what I did is, after reading your book, I wanted to test it, of course.
Yeah.
And then what I did is I used a Gemini thread, and then I like, let's say, explained the detail and said, like, look, this is my son. He's 12 years old. This is what he needs to learn. I want you to create a problem set. And I basically prompt him everything, how he need to tell him and how he help him to achieve that. And the craziest thing is I was in the kitchen doing something. My son came and he was excited. He told me, like, hey, I solved Pythagoras. And he was not familiar with the concept, but he was able to solve it by his own. And he was like super excited about that. And it's a fun way to do it.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at how children learn in their early years, It's kind of productive failure. They try something, it doesn't work, it doesn't discourage them. They just get up and try again,
Yeah.
because it's fun, because, figuring something out itself is a fun activity, And I think we need to productive failure just brings that back into the learning
Yeah.
and schooling and organizations in a very systematic manner.
That's so funny. There's one story that you mention in your book that you received like I think a tripod, and then you digged it into the ground because you
Yeah.
wanted to have a couple of those, right?
Yeah. I think, well, a tricycle actually
A
was my first
tricycle, yeah.
tricycle that my parents bought. And one of the things I did was I sewed it into the ground, hoping that a tree of tricycles would form. So that's good transfer, right?
Yeah.
You see, and then I thought, okay, why not? Why can't we have a tree of tricycles?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then again, to summarize it, I think it's like using, so what productive failure actually achieved is using our, let's say, natural inclination in order to really deepen the learning experience for better outcomes.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Better outcomes, better transfer, creativity. In a way you think about it, we're not saying that expert knowledge is not important. We're not saying instruction is not important.
Yeah.
What productive failure is really saying is you will get more out of the same instruction if you
Yeah.
proceeded with some failure-based activation.
Yeah. Crazy. I have two more questions. One is how you envision that AI will change how we teach in the next decade.
I mean, like I said, one of the ways that there are good ways that AI can change and there are bad ways that AI can change. We are seeing a lot of the bad ways right now where, people are using AI to just solve things, to increase their performance without learning. I call this unproductive success. It gives you an illusion of learning in high performance because the performance is coming from the tool or the AI rather than you. Okay.
Yeah.
And that may be good for performance and productivity, maybe, but it's not good for learning. But if you want, therefore we really need to design AI tools in service of deep learning. And when you ask the question that way, you have to ask the next question. Okay, then what learning model do I use to teach? You've got to build that model inside. Otherwise, AI will teach it in the direct instruction way. So you've got to build that model, the training on that model. Now, there are, again, many ways of doing this. One is prompt engineering. So you can just prompt the model and hope that it produces, good. And that's still better than the generic model, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Prompt your way to personalization. You can't prompt your way to high fidelity productive failure. You really then have to train the models to design using the learning model and then design the interaction or the facilitation using the same model. And the power, of course, is in the AI, but the power is even greater, many times greater, if AI is trained on a robust learning model. And that's the underlying proposition of LearnPF as well. That's how we're trying to design AI that is pedagogically sound, trained better, so that it teaches better.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And what is your final broader vision for LearnPF, looking to the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, basically, you can apply the learning model to anything you want to learn. So although we start with as a math learning app, we really want to grow into, it could be any topic that you want to learn at any point in time, anywhere. And basically we'll say, yes, that's great. Let's learn through the productive failure learning model with Gen AI so that whatever it is that you want to learn, you can learn it deeply and better.
Yeah. All right. That's great. Is there something more you want to share with the audience?
No, I think we've had a very fun conversation, very spontaneous and natural. So I think it's all good.
Indeed. Yeah, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope we see each other really soon.
I'm sure we will. The next time I'm in Zurich, I'll help you.
Great. See you. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, Rudi. Bye-bye.